1S1. Any unit in District 2, Zone 2, having a chainsaw and some availability to help out one of our own, please?
Clearing my 38. I'll be on a 1019 to HCS.
1021-4642, priority 3,
Code
please.
2 for a 1055 no contact well-being check on one of
Cody,
our
from
own.
this location, could I have a unit 1025 with me for Code 2, bring in some water?
I'm down in the shop, and I just wanted to go over the next chapter of the PEG tour. Some of the features that make the PEG Storeford repeater controllers unique. Something that was necessary. In order for me to explain why it's necessary, I guess I have to go into a little bit of a backstory to explain some of the fundamental core characteristics, I guess you could say, of standard simplex systems, conventional repeaters, and versus Storeford repeaters, storm-forward repeaters that PEG uses. A common occurrence in Storeford repeaters is transmitter collisions. A transmitter collision is when more than one or more, actually I should say two or more, field radios transmit simultaneously. And it usually ends in some kind of carnage where, the person transmits, another person transmits with them, and nobody can understand what's going on. That occurrence, believe it or not, in a Storeford repeater, when compared to conventional, either a simplex system or a conventional repeater, believe it or not, it's up to 80 times more likely to occur, a transmitter collision, to occur on a Storeford repeater system versus a real-time system. And I'm going to tell you why. Let's start off with the basics of real-time communication, say a simplex system. On a simplex system, on any real-time system, simplex, conventional repeater, a linked conventional repeater, the chances of a transmitter collision are fairly small. It does happen, but it's fairly small. The reason why it's small is because since it's a real-time system, when somebody transmits, if you say we're about to transmit while somebody else was about to transmit, and you heard audio coming out of your speaker, you hear them talking, you know not to transmit. If you didn't know and you continue to transmit, then you would have a transmitter collision with them and you transmitting simultaneously. Okay, so on a simplex system, no repeater, single frequency, you essentially have a 250 millisecond window of opportunity to transmit simultaneously when somebody else is transmitting. That 250 milliseconds, the way I mean this, 250 milliseconds is a quarter of a second. That means that if you're using simplex and your radio is configured with some type of coded squelch, whether it be CTCSS or DCS coded squelch, you could have up to a 250 milliseconds of latency. By latency, I mean that from the time you press this PTT button to the time that the person you're talking to's receiver opens up and the speaker is able to hear you talking into your radio, it could be as much as 250 milliseconds for the coded squelch systems to receive the transmission, decode it, and then pass the audio through to the speaker. On a conventional repeater, it could be as much as 600 milliseconds, and on a linked repeater, it could be as much as 1.5 to 1.6 milliseconds, which is 1.5 seconds of latency. Now that's on the high side, but I've actually seen that happen, that the delays or the latency on the systems are fairly long. It all depends on how quickly the receiver, how sensitive it is, how quickly it can decode and pass that audio on to the receiver, to the speaker rather. Okay, so with that said, we'll just concentrate right now on simplex, okay? With a possibility of 250 milliseconds of latency, that means in order for two people talking simplex to have a transmitter collision, two people would have to transmit within that 250 millisecond time duration of latency. If the person that's going to talk is just slightly longer than that 250 millisecond time latency, they're going to hear the person talking out of the speaker, and they're not going to transmit because they can not naturally hear somebody talking, so they're not going to transmit. On a Storford repeater, instead of the possibility of the transmitter collision being 250 milliseconds or under, now not only do you have that possibility up to 250 milliseconds, you actually have it the entire duration of the message itself. So if the message is 15 seconds, you have a whole 15 seconds to possibly have a transmitter collision because there's likely no feedback that somebody's transmitting. Okay, so with that said, it does depend on how it's configured, but let's go over the three configurations. On a Storford repeater, they can be configured three different ways. Configuration A, B, and C. A configuration A is a configuration that we don't use at all in PEG, and it is the most common way that a Storford repeater is set up. Configuration A is a single frequency without the use of CTCSS or DCS, or with the use of CTCSS or DCS. Either way, a single frequency is used. In that mode, or in that configuration, that's a mode that we don't use, or a configuration we don't use in PEG, because users experience what we call Cinput. Cinput is essentially, it means simplex input. And what any of you who have actually used the store and forward repeater know what I'm talking about. With that configuration, when somebody is transmitting, any units, any field radios within range of the person transmitting will hear the transmission twice, or hear the message twice. They'll hear the Cinput as it goes into the repeater, so they're hearing the person directly from their radio, and they'll hear the repeated audio coming out of the repeater, so they essentially hear it twice. Well, Cinput is a very undesirable trait of a Storford system. It's something that's rather unnatural, and it's confusing to a lot of people. So the Cinput needs to be eliminated in PEG. There's two ways to control or eliminate Cinput, and those are the other two configurations, the configuration B and a configuration C. In a configuration B, we use a single frequency, but we use a split CTCSS tone or DCS tone. In a configuration C, we use a split frequency with a single CTCSS tone or a DCS tone. Both of them have the ability to eliminate the Cinput so that the person monitoring doesn't have to hear the transmission twice. But here's the curveball. By eliminating the Cinput, you eliminate the feedback to monitoring units that somebody's actually talking. Meaning that you're not hearing them anymore twice, you're only hearing them once, which is a good thing, but the downside of eliminating the Cinput is that you no longer hear the feedback coming from them, so you don't know if they're transmitting. And what this ends up doing is it increases the chance of a transmitter collision, because now the person monitoring doesn't know that somebody else is already transmitting. Even if you were to use a configuration A, which I spoke about earlier that we don't use in PEG, single frequency with no CTCSS or no DCS tones, or a single DCS tone or CTCSS. Either way, configuration A, you get that feedback, but you think about this, you only get that feedback for as long as the transmitting radio is within range of the receiving radios. If that person goes out beyond the range of the receiving radio, they're only going to hear that transmission once off the repeater, right? So essentially that feedback is missing also, even in that configuration. So this has always been a problem. A problem that I had taken care of and modified a long time ago using an off-the-shelf store and forward repeater way back in probably 1994.
586, code 8, 1086 P1.
The feature is called the Q-tone. The Q-tone is an audible activity alert system tone that transmits system-wide on whatever system you have. If not a simplex system, of course, no need to have it. But on any Storford-based, a Category 1, Category 2, or Category 3 system, the Q-tone actually alerts everybody system-wide that somebody on the system just pressed the PTT button on a radio. Okay? So this eliminates any of that disconnect that you don't know when somebody's transmitting. So every time you hear the Q tone, it's basically the same characteristics as hearing somebody on a real-time system. It's like hearing their voice. So the Q tone represents when they're pressing their PTT button. And you hear that, like I said, system-wide. So I'm going to show you a demo in a second here. Let me explain something quickly, though. I'll show you, if I show you a graphical representation of the audio on the Storford repeater. I'm going to show you, actually I'll show you now. The Q tone is over here on the left, then you get the message delay, and then you get the message itself. If I take the audio from the transmission and I slide it into the audio delay section, you'll see that the delay that you experience after the Q tone is precisely the length of the actual message itself. Okay, so that's typically how a Storford repeater works, except for the Q tone. That's one of the unique features of this of the system. So with that said, let me show you this demo. And on the demo, I'm splitting the on the top section of your screen, I'm splitting the screen. So on the top section of the screen, you'll see the graphical representation of the audio that you're hearing, and on the bottom, you'll see the actual radio. And I'm using, for this demo, I'm going to be using this this Storford repeater, this single zone Category 1 repeater. So this isn't on our network system. It's just a quick demo I'm going to do with this repeater to show you how the Q tone works in a Category 1 system. All right, so I'm going to do that now. So let me point the camera over to our radio, and I'm going to show you how the Q tone functions.
One S1 to 127. Sir, what's your status? Be tied up 1067 North Kingstown. 1040 of an ETA when you're going to be clearing that location. Another 45 to 60 mics. Code 4. You can code 5 on the 1021 for now. I'm going to be tied up myself on a 1038. When you're clear of that location, could you advise me by radio and 1021 4272 priority 3.
Okay, so I hope that demo gave you a better idea, a better perspective on how the Q tone works and its functionality and what it can do and the differences that it makes in communicating with a Storford system. I also want to point out that a Storford repeater is absolutely vital for the PEG system. I have had questions as to, can I use a duplex repeater with it? Can I use different bands? No, the PEG system, just like GMRS was based in the UHF band. The PEG system is based in the VHF low band. We need to maximize the amount of functionality we get out of the system. And as I mentioned in some of the other videos for the PEG Tour and a lot of the other ones, is that the low band frequency spectrum is a huge, important part of the PEG radio licensing program and systems, because we're not messing around here. We need to get as much range out of the system as possible. So low band offers a lot more range than a comparable UHF system, even in simplex mode. In fact, a lot of our simplex communications on the PEG low band systems actually rival some of the repeater systems in UHF around here with the GMRS systems. So a PEG system operating in the low band spectrum actually has roughly 2.5 times or over 2 times greater functionality and range when compared to a comparable UHF system. So the VHF low band spectrum is the core of what makes up the system. The other side to using this low band spectrum is that, remember, the license itself in PEG is coordinated frequencies that are assigned to the individuals or groups that are using it. It's not a community license like GMRS or ham or some of the other license-free radio services such as MERS, CB, and FRS. It's not like that. The frequencies that are available in your area are best chosen. We choose those frequencies for you based on the candidate list that we get from the coordinator specifically for this program, and those are chosen as the best of the bunch for your group. And because it's coordinated for your private use, the spectrum, we can use the entire low band spectrum, any frequency between 30 and 50 megahertz. Right now I'm focusing more on the 42 to 45 megahertz range because we're building custom antennas in that range, and I'm focusing more on one section because there's no need of spreading everything out and having a huge range of frequencies requiring different antennas when I can concentrate in one general area. But generally, we can be licensed anywhere from 30 to 50 megahertz. So anyway, to answer the question of can we use different bands, no, the PEG radio band was made to optimize low-budget radio communication systems. Part of the way of doing that is getting the most out of the frequency bands that we choose. Low band is the primary. UHF is only used for XTR extender portables to an XTR system. And we also have, where is it here? We also have low band portable radios that are also the standard for portables if you didn't want to go with a UHF radio through an XTR system like I showed you in the previous videos. The second side of that is how do we optimize it even further for most cost-effective means in a radio system? Well, having some form of a repeater is really vital to increasing the range. That's why we have two types. We have single zone category 1 and a multi-zone category 3. The multi-zone is an expandable system, so essentially it's built in a modular fashion, meaning that we can, if we had, once you have a category 3 system, you can expand that system by adding nodes to different areas that you don't have coverage in, and you can easily obtain coverage in that area that you previously didn't have that coverage. That's another means of adding functionality and capabilities to the system. Well, those of you who are not familiar with conventional repeaters use duplexers. It's essentially a filter. And what it does is it essentially filters out the transmit frequency from the receive frequency, and it works in duplex operation, meaning that the receiver is active while the transmitter is active, and the duplexer is used to isolate those two activities. The issues with duplexers is, one, they require special skills and special equipment to tune them, and they are precisely tuned to the frequencies that are being used on the repeater system. The second side of it is that they're expensive as hell, and I'm not talking about the cheesy mobile duplexers you guys are finding probably on eBay. I'm talking about real duplexers, base station duplexers, what they call band pass, band reject duplexers. Those are the types of duplexers that you would use in a system like this. Here's the side that a lot of people don't understand. Not only do you need an expensive duplexer to use a conventional repeater, you also need the ability to tune them, which means that you're probably going to need close to $5 to $7 grand worth of test equipment to actually tune them properly. The other side of it is their expense, their size. Now here's the biggest thing, their size. All the videos that I had made to show demonstrations of how duplex repeaters work in the demos, I'm actually just showing UHF duplexers, which are, you know, about 25 to 35 pounds, and they're about, probably about maybe 14 inches tall by 19 inches wide, and they weigh, like I said, about 35 pounds. Well, that was just used as a demo, but in low band, if we would have actually tried to do a duplex repeater in low band, the duplexers range from roughly 6.5 feet to 9 to 10 feet, and they weigh between 130 to 190 pounds. So they're huge, and because the lower in frequency you go, the bigger the wavelength gets. So the frequency, the filtering mechanisms have to accommodate that. That lower frequency, longer wavelength. You know, so not only are the duplexers huge, they're unbelievably rare and unbelievably expensive. Just as an example, TXRX makes a duplexer that I actually had here in the shop for quite a while. They retail for $6,000. You know, you can get them used for about $2 and change, roughly. But where are you? First of all, where are you going to store them? You know, they're so big. It's so unpractical for this type of radio system. You know, the average person is not going to be able to tune a duplexer by themselves, if you can even find one for low band. So that, in the equation of putting together the PEG radio system, that option is completely eliminated from the equation, because that is just so unpractical to use that it's not even in the cards. That has to be eliminated. So my point is that a Storford repeater has so much flexibility, is so inexpensive in comparison to a conventional repeater, and offers actually more functionality than a conventional or any real-time system. And some of those points are being made in the communications for the Prepper video series, which you probably want to check out. Because if you're interested in what I'm telling you now, then you're obviously in tune with the technical side of this stuff, and you probably want to check out that video series that really points out some of the fundamental core features that a Storford repeater can give you over a conventional system. And I've had conventional two-way repeater systems in this state for my nonprofit groups, and I always seem to gravitate back to the Storford repeater system because of what I can achieve and what I can do. With far less expense, far less hardware, I can achieve way more with a Storford system versus a conventional and repeater system. And the other one thing that I wanted to point out is that in PEG, we have both systems, actually. We have the Storford repeater system, which is store and forward for our main repeater network, but you also have the capability of having real-time simplex communications. So you actually have both. You're not stuck with just the store and forward repeater. You have real-time simplex communications, and on low band, since the PEG system is really the core components in our PEG system is really just mobiles and base stations. That's our core components, our core equipment. You're going to find that the simplex range is probably far greater than you ever experienced in other radio services, because low band has it propagates better. It has a better range. And the simplex range of some of our PEG systems, like I said, rivals some of the local GMRS repeaters around here. Now, when you combine that range with some form of repeater, like a Category 1 or a Category 3 system, your capabilities go up quite a bit. So, anyway, I hope some of the stuff I touched on today will clue you in a little bit more on how the system works, some of the unique features that we have. There's other unique features but with the controllers, but a lot of them are related, and they're so technical that I don't think it's really worth explaining. The reality is that the folks that are paying attention to this video and understand what I'm talking about, they're more technically minded. But the PEG system was really designed for people who don't have the understanding of radio, and it's designed to be installed by the average person, and I think that's a huge, important thing. So all the stuff that I'm sharing with you now isn't really necessary that you know it, but since a lot of people are really inquisitive as to how it works and what the differences are, some of the differences anyway, I thought I would share that with you now. One of the other things I do want to cover in the very near future is the XTR portable systems in more focused on the channels, the way we set up the channel systems, and how the portables work. I did cover, of course, how the XTR system works, but I didn't really get into the nitty-gritty of the programming and how the channels are set up on the portable, and I think a lot of you might be interested in seeing how that functions. So anyway, I guess that's good for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'm sure I'll have some more videos soon to share with you. Thanks very much.